Please present your octopus. Hello, and welcome to the China Podcast. You're listening to episode 3. Follow us on Twitter. You can find us at The China Podcast. That is at The China Podcast. Leave a like. Leave a DM. Engage with us. We'd love to hear from you.
And email us. Email us. Do you have a story to tell? Any suggestions for topics you might want to hear about? Tell us. Share them with us. Don't be shy.
Since our last episode, we've been busy. We've been expanding. And we're thrilled to say that you can now listen to us on Google Podcasts and Apple iTunes. You can also find us on a place called Stitcher if you'd rather listen to us there.
And for that person who asked us over the weekend if the podcast was up on YouTube, the answer is, we're glad to say, yes. Yes, it is.
Yes, we are. We're there.
Yes, we are there. So subscribe to us. Like and subscribe and all that jazz. Subscribe to your preferred platform. We're only new on YouTube, so just type in...
We're only up a few days, yeah.
Navy Barracks, the China Podcast, or Mosquitoes, the China Podcast.
Yep.
You'll find it.
You might need to do a little bit of digging.
Show us your support and we'll reward you with a little treat for the ears.
So the podcast is with all the major players now. It's up on Apple, it's on Google, it's on YouTube, and it's on Spotify.
So go ahead, pay those places a visit. Listen to us, subscribe to us, make our day.
Well said, Clint. Right, before we move on, we must first acknowledge all the fantastic feedback we received following the release of our first 2 episodes of the podcast.
I've been blown away, mightily blown away.
We're over the moon.
The response, it was unexpected. We've had a good number of downloads to go with it, didn't we?
Yeah, and across all platforms at that.
Yeah, so according to what we read, we're in the top 25% of downloads for a 7-day period.
That is true. And there's a website called The Podcast Host, which provides guides and tutorials, tips for podcasters, all kinds of helpful bits and bobs. Now, they say there that if you can manage just 26 downloads for an episode in its first week of release, then you can consider that good going.
We did it in a day.
We did it in a day at the weekend.
And we're delighted.
Yes, we are. So, thank you. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to listen. Thank you for your kind words. It's much appreciated.
And thank you to one of the folks in the Irish WeChat group for their personal anecdote about teaching poetry, the poetry of W.B. Yeats, to disadvantaged kids in Dublin.
How did that go again? I don't know. I'm sure he won't mind us telling the story.
So the teacher in question was asking for feedback on whichever one of Yeats's poems they were discussing. And one of the young lads down the back of the classroom shouted, "Shy!" in response to the question.
Oh, yeah. And he asked the student to elaborate, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. So elaborate. He goes, "Well, yeah, it's fucking shy."
I mean, you have to emphasise somehow, don't you? And of course, in Irish lingo, dropping an F-bomb like that is the best way to clarify an opinion.
Yeah. And if you're listening right now and you have no idea what I just said, shy in this context is shite or shit, just with an E and an added expression. And that's how we'd say it in Ireland, and particularly Dublin.
Now, we're not all about bad language on this show, but speaking of shite, Owen, have you ever eaten a duck's arse?
Do you know what? I probably have.
Well, in general, do you like barbecue duck?
I love it. Yeah, it's great. I love the way you can just buy it on the street. It's cooked. You walk away eating it out of a plastic container, and it's cheap.
Yeah, those guys seem to be on every street corner in China.
Yeah, and if they aren't, it's cooked chicken or some sort of cooked something.
Yeah, it's always one or the other. But, you know, what got me thinking about this week's podcast was one of these barbecue ducks that we've been talking about. Like all the usual cuts of meat are there. You got the breast chunks, the legs, the wings, even the head and neck.
And the feet. And can you actually eat the head of it?
It's never interested me. like it looks rock solid, kind of like something that would probably break a pane of glass.
Yeah.
if you toss it.
It doesn't look like something you can bite. And I don't know what you're
It
going to...
doesn't look like it has much meat at all. I don't know where you'd start with a duck's head.
Like rip the skin off it or suck the skin off it, suck the brain. I don't know. What would you do? Maybe suck the brain out of it.
I don't know.
I do love a bit of fish cheek.
Yeah, that's good.
It is good. It's small. You wouldn't even call it bite size. It's tiny. It's little.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It nearly melts in your mouth.
Yeah,
it?
It's very good. Very good.
But with the duck, I mean, we have all the usual cuts of meat that I mentioned, but then we also have the arse.
Or the posterior, or the bum, to be less vulgar.
Right.
Right. So, the duck's arse is a peculiar piece of meat. It tastes different to the other parts of the duck. And it's got this, how would you describe it? It's a kind of a smokiness to it. Has a kind of a smokiness to it.
Yeah, and it can be weirdly inconsistent.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like highly edible, but other times only all right.
I don't know. Maybe it depends on whether the duck relieved itself before it was barbecued.
Or being shot or whatever. Might have been the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was looking at this thing on the plate in front of me, and it got me thinking about all the unusual foods that they have here in China, and more to the point, why these kinds of foods are eaten here. And this is what we want to discuss this week. We'd like to take you on a culinary odyssey through the weird and wonderful foods of China, and maybe also dispel some of the myths and the misconceptions that surround Chinese food culture. Let me ask you, Eoin, would you consider yourself a fussy eater?
I'll eat pretty much anything. But I don't... This is probably not the best thing to do in China, but I don't really like when everybody's eating out of the same bowl.
Right.
So I don't really get on well at hot pots and stuff like that. And when everybody sits down and they have the big plates of food, and people are reaching over and taking little bits of food out of each plate and then, going back to putting it in their mouth and stuff. I don't have any choice. I have to put up with it, but I don't really like it.
Yeah, I mean, China, it's not really the place for people who fuss about their food, is it?
No. Like, I mean, if you have a particular diet, you can get by. Most foods and ingredients, they're all here. But there might be times when you go out into a restaurant and you look at a picture on a menu, and what comes out of the door might not be the same thing that you ordered.
Right, and I mean, it's worth having a translator app on your phone handy if you don't have the language. Have you ever taken that punt?
Loads of times, plenty of times, yeah.
Have you ever tried durian pizza?
If you gave me a durian pizza, I would throw that thing out the window. Have you?
Well, thankfully, I've never fell into that trap. I mean, what looks like melted cheese certainly doesn't smell like it.
No, the people here, they're obsessed by durian.
Yeah, it's durian. It's like this large, prickly-looking fruit with a kind of creamy, custardy centre.
Yeah, it's a huge fruit. It kind of looks like a stegosaurus.
Yeah, it's like sort of thorny to the touch, and in spite of it being a quite exotic thing to look at, it smells repulsive.
You can smell them a mile away.
Since come to China, I have become more adventurous, but durian is the one food that I definitely never go near.
It smells like feet, man. It smells like feet. How adventurous have you been?
Somewhat, I suppose. Probably not as much as others, but I have eaten a yak and some donkey meat, century eggs, duck blood. I've tried the lining of a cow's stomach.
Tripe?
I don't think so.
That's the lining of a cow's stomach.
Oh, that's what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tripe, that's a new one. Yeah, maybe some other foods too, but that's all I can think of at the moment.
Yeah, we'll talk about century eggs now in a bit. But a few of what you mentioned there might sound like delicacies to many, but they're normal things here in China. They're normal things to eat.
Did you ever see that episode of Carl Pilkington on An Idiot Abroad? I think he was in Beijing and he was freaking out at the sight of this local lad eating a fetus egg.
Yeah, was it actually a fetus that he was eating?
Well, I mean, the TV show made it out to be that way anyway.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. I know where he was, because I saw that episode, the Carl Pilkington episode. He was in Beijing. He was in the night market in Beijing, which is right close to the Forbidden City, actually. Right close to Tiananmen Square.
So it's a popular part of town.
It's a popular part of town. You can go in, you can eat snakes and scorpions and all sorts of weird stuff. But when I was in Chengdu, Carl Pilkington was actually in Chengdu. And I was staying in a youth hostel with a bunch of foreigners. And, one of them says, "Oh, English guy, Carl Pilkington is down in the park around the corner."
Yeah.
I'm like, who's Carl Pilkington? But, whatever, we'll go and have a look. So I go down and there's a film crew and Carl Pilkington is standing there. He's just a baldy lad with a head like an orange. And just a baldy lad with a head like an orange that someone's filming. I went to the bathroom and I tell you, I was more impressed that day by the man that stood beside me. The man that stood beside me, he looked like he was Mongolian of origin, but he was at least 7 feet tall. He's the largest human being that I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
But yeah, that was the day that I actually met Carl Pilkington, and I actually went, "Hello, Carl Pilkington," and he went, "Hello," and that was that.
And that was it. And that's pretty much him. So it sounds like him.
That's pretty much, yeah.
And yeah, like they definitely threw him into the deep end on that show. But I suppose that was the premise of the show. Yeah,
that was the whole thing. I think there's a misconception on many levels as to what the Chinese diet is. But as out there as they often are, the quality of how they cook things, you can't beat it. It's fantastic how they cook things.
Yeah, it can't be faulted. It is great.
Yeah. Like you mentioned just there how you tried the duck's blood and the cow's stomach before. How did they go down?
Well, to eat them without being boiled in a hot pot would be quite an ordinary experience.
Yeah. So my father used to eat tripe. He used to eat cow's stomach. I don't like it at all, to be honest. And it is kind of bland. And to me, I agree with you. What they're cooked in and how they're made is what makes them appetable. The ingredients that are used, they're crucial.
Yeah, and like, is there anyone better in the world to use such an abundance of ingredients in their cooking than the Chinese?
They're a great bunch of lads.
The best. I like the thing about it here is that in terms of animal parts especially, very little is thrown aside.
The butchers use everything, every part.
And there's always somebody to buy it.
I'll tell you a little story. There's a butcher's in Dublin 7. It's up on the Phibsborough Road, and I used to live around the corner from it. And these are usual butchers, and he'd sell sausages and pork chops and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
This is going back to the end of the 90s. This butcher's shop realised that there was a lot of Chinese people hanging around, and one day one of the Chinese lads goes in and says, where can I get some trotters? Where can I get some pig trotters?
Yeah. And
the following day, the window of the butcher shop had pig's feet.
Wow.
Like all around the bottom of it. And he was selling loads of them. I used to go in there and get my sausages, and he sold loads of pig's feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they literally use everything. And you're probably your average market here has thousands of people walking through it every day.
Oh, easily.
Yeah. How many of them do you think go for the stinky tofu?
There's always one.
Yeah. So tofu is made from condensed soy milk. So all you soy milk latte people out there, that's what tofu is made from, and it's pressed into solid white blocks, usually vary in softness. It's very similar to cheese making, so it's kind of like a soy milk cheese, and it has lots of health benefits. It's low in calories, and it's really high in protein.
Yeah, so it's a great alternative to meat.
Yeah, so
if you don't eat meat.
Yeah, it's a great alternative. So if you're vegetarians out there and don't worry. If you're in China and you don't eat meat, tofu is a great way to get your protein. But let's talk about stinky tofu. Now, stinky tofu is a snack food. It's served in these small little cubes which are skewered together, salty in a little bowl, and it's called stinky tofu because of its smell. It's really overbearing. So to make you understand why the way it does, it's made from a mixture of tofu combined with fermented milk, vegetables, and a meat or fish flavoured brine.
Sounds very much like you're describing a witch's broth.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the smell, you can't escape the smell. So anyway, the brine is most effective when it's weeks or months old, and the aging process combined with the blend of ingredients makes it stink. It makes a really potent smell.
Yeah, I don't remember actually having tried it before. Would you recommend I give it a go?
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go down to Jaifeng Bay and we'll go to the food street and we'll give it a blast. What do you reckon?
Yeah, sounds like a good plan. So
you'll know where they're selling it. You'll be able to smell it a mile off.
Yeah. Tell me about these century eggs that you mentioned earlier. Is there a story behind them?
There is a big story behind the century eggs. This is a story based on chance. Century eggs, they're basically preserved eggs, and back in the day, about 6 centuries ago, during the Ming dynasty, not even the Qing dynasty, the one before, this farmer was out walking through his fields in rural Hunan, and he happened upon some naturally preserved duck eggs in muddy water, kind of like the bogman in Ireland, the mummified eggs.
Yeah.
Right. So as you do, he picked them out of the water and he took a bite of them.
Of course, yeah. Naturally.
Why would he do that? But he did. Right. Anyway, but he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the taste. And so he put a little bit of salt on them. It's like, oh yeah, here's some mummified eggs that have probably been here for thousands of years. I'll put some salt on them and eat them.
Yeah, give them some flavour.
Yeah. So anyway, he came up with a plan, and his plan was to replicate the eggs using manual preservation techniques.
Right, and he was a farmer. Was he making it up on the spot?
He might as well have been. But you know what? Whatever he did, it worked. Because the eggs, they were instant hit. And they went on to become a delicacy all over China. So, how do you prepare century eggs? Well, nowadays we use chicken, duck or quail eggs, whatever we want. And they're soaked in a large volume of black tea, lime, salt and freshly burned wood ash. And they can be soaked for anywhere from 7 weeks to 5 months, and they achieve the century egg taste.
Right, and the lime is an interesting addition.
The lime, yeah. So the muddy water that the farmer discovered the eggs in, it had traces of lime, and hence the reason why they're so well preserved. One other thing is they have a tendency to change colour. They kind of go a grey or a green. They turn into different colours because of the lime and the preserving fact.
Yeah, and sometimes they're like, it's like you're looking at a crystal or something.
Sometimes it's like you're looking at a crystal, yeah. Like
a fossil, the fossil from Jurassic Park. It's got a mosquito inside.
Yeah.
They extract the DNA from the mosquito.
Yeah.
The dinosaur DNA from the mosquito.
Yeah. Well, maybe they had a whole bunch of witches, and they like the witches that made the stinky tofu, and they'd be able to tell your future from the preserved egg.
That's interesting.
Maybe it's a crystal ball. It's not a crystal ball, a crystal egg.
A crystal egg.
Could be.
Have you ever tried spinach noodles?
Oh, the green ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're good. Yeah.
You like them? Yeah.
I do. Yeah.
Now, spinach noodles, they're more popular in the north of China, in particular Xi'an. And spinach noodles are botsai mian, as they're called in Mandarin. They're really like any other type of noodle, and except that the spinach is kind of ground down into a green paste,
a bit of a powder, yeah,
and then like added to the dough.
Yeah.
Mixed together, you get the green spinach dough.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you do the usual thing like you do with noodles. You knead it and shape it into sheets before cutting them into noodles.
Yeah.
To be boiled alive in a big pot of water. So yeah, just like regular noodles, really.
Yeah.
With the spinach. There's a fella on YouTube. He's called the Food Ranger. He's worth checking out for anyone interested. And in one of his videos, he goes to Xi'an and he sees this exact spinach making process being carried out before him.
The Food Ranger, is he popular?
Oh yeah, he's got like 5 million subscribers and
5 million.
But his videos are superb. They're superbly made, and he's fluent in Mandarin too.
So is he a local or is he a foreigner?
No, he's American.
He's American.
Yeah.
And 5 million subscribers on food in China. I'll definitely check him out. Yeah. That sounds cool.
But he goes to other places as well, I think, around the world. But he does an awful lot of his content is from China.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, if you want to learn how to make traditional hand-pulled noodles, there are schools all over Lanzhou and Gansu. Would you like to learn how to make them?
I'd love to. I would absolutely love to. I love those hand-pulled noodles. I have this image in my head of an old movie of old China, and you see them spinning the noodles out. I'd love to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's a very unique skill.
Yeah,
and it is a skill. It might look easy to the eye, but
yeah,
there's a technique, there's a method to it, and it's on my bucket list.
Yeah.
And like you get a certificate when you complete the course with them. It takes about 2 or 3 weeks or something.
I've graduated in noodle pulling.
I
can pull my noodles.
Yeah. And this certificate qualifies you to work in any hand-pulled noodle restaurant anywhere in the world.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah, so you can open your own establishment.
Oh, that'd be very nice.
Yeah. We touched on basically there, but a fraction of the unusual foods in China. We could go on for ages and ages, but I think it's worth pointing out that it's not only the Chinese who eat strange things, so do lots of others around the world. Here's looking at you, Louisiana.
Yeah. When you think about it, the French eat snails.
And frogs' legs and horse meat.
Yeah, the British eat Stilton. Do you know what Stilton is?
I know what Stilton is, yeah.
Right, and they like it. They're look at this blue Stilton. It's great. Isn't it so fancy? Yeah, it's mouldy cheese. And they age it long enough that it's called walking cheese because it's crawling with maggots.
Oh, lovely.
Maggots.
So remember that the next time you eat Stilton.
Yeah, and the Aussies, some places down under, they cook up caterpillars. And they bill it as a tourist treat.
Oh, how inviting!
Yeah.
And then of course in Japan, you know the fugu fish. I think that's how you call it. It's highly prized, despite it having a poisonous sac that, if not removed with due diligence, can kill the person eating it.
And the burning question: why? Why in the name of God would you take the risk of eating that fish when there are plenty of other delicious fish in the sea? But anyway, Louisiana, what kind of mischief did they get up to?
Alligators. In New Orleans. Louisiana. I know we won't poke fun at them.
No.
It's a nice part of the world. Alligator is grilled. And they put meat on a stick and they call it an alligator sausage.
So alligator meat on a stick and they call it a sausage?
Yeah.
Someone's got to teach them Americans English. So anyway, the moral of the story here is don't point your fingers at China when it comes to eating habits. Look at yourselves. Look at what you're eating and the type of food that you guys eat. Because I know I'm Irish and steak and kidney pie has kidneys in it, and black pudding is coagulated pig's blood, and I love it.
Yeah, everyone does.
Yeah.
We eat it for a fry-up breakfast.
Absolutely.
Everyone eats it.
I'd put it in a salad.
You go and stay in any hotel in Ireland, a bed and breakfast, and your breakfast they're going to have some black pudding, some white pudding as well.
I'd eat that stuff raw.
Would you? Yeah?
I would, yeah. I have done.
Well,
Yeah.
You felt okay afterwards?
The Clonakilty black pudding, chop that up, give it a go. It's all right. It's already cooked. You're only reheating it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't know that. But yeah, don't be like Marco Polo when he labelled the Chinese barbaric for the things he saw them eat. I mean, like, sometimes you must accept that different cultures will bring different food cultures. This is just how things are. Nobody's perfect, and we're all learning, and we're all becoming more aware, not only of what we eat, but also the impact our food consumption has on, like, animal species.
It does have
and the planet.
And the planet. And the methane that given off by cows and stuff like that.
Yes.
You know, it does actually impact what you eat, impacts the environment. But anyway, that's a story for another day.
Indeed. So, what are the given reasons behind why Chinese people will eat almost everything? Let's first consider the geography of the country. China is this vast, geographically diverse expanse of land. It is nearly 10% of all plant species and 14% of animal species on Earth. When you have such a rich geographical landscape, then you're certain to have a wide variety of ingredients. Different diets exist across different parts of the country. So even if urban dwellers have a more regular diet, those living in rural China will probably have a more adventurous palate. Take Sichuan, for example. Sichuan consumes the most rabbit in the country, and rabbit head is a delicacy. If you were to go to Gannan County in Gansu province, then you'd find a lot of yak meat.
Yeah, and it's also worth looking at traditional Chinese medicine when finding reasons as to why Chinese people consume such a wide variety of foods. In Chinese medicine, many plants and animals are used. In the minds of Chinese people, medicine and food come from the same source. And, you know, there's a lot of, your body's a temple, what you put into it is what you get out of it. And that is, Chinese people think that eating is the same as taking medicine. And this in turn, it determines what they will eat for food. I can give you some examples, but it's worth instead just going and checking them out. But what I will say is that textbooks on traditional Chinese medicine identify more than 1,500 animal species that can be used for medicinal purposes. Anything from a seahorse to a rhino.
That is true. Finally, let's briefly mention religion as a reason. 90% of Chinese people consider themselves irreligious, and they don't share the kind of food taboos that you might find in faiths like Judaism and Islam. Chinese people don't have a god. They instead worship their ancestors, their parents, and their grandparents. So they're not like Jews or Christians or Muslims and others who have religious rules that kind of dictate what you can or can't eat.
Or Hindus, even Hindus, they can't eat cows, you know. But in addition to those three reasons, a few decades ago, there was a big law that shaped China's wildlife industry. In 1988, the wildlife protection law encouraged people to domesticate and breed certain species of wildlife for various reasons, food and medicine being two of them. But in 2016, the government limited wildlife breeding to only scientific research and preservation. But by then, the wildlife farming industry was already booming, and there were millions of people employed, and it was feeding millions more. However, it's important to state that only a minority of people consumes this produce, and we're talking pangolins and bats and all sorts of weird stuff that's being bred for food, and that figure is less than 1% of the people in China. And in the wake of the COVID pandemic, the regulations on the wildlife industry, they've been tightened even further.
Of course, yeah. But you know, I also have a theory, and I don't know if there have been any studies into it. There may have some truth attached.
Maybe.
And that is that frequent famines throughout Chinese history have shaped what people eat today.
Well, when I went home to Ireland with my wife, we went to the beach, and she had never seen anything like it before. She went to the rocks, and I showed her some limpets. And if you don't know what a limpet is a shellfish that attaches itself to rocks, and when the water comes in, it's off the rock, and then when the water goes away, it sticks itself really tightly to the rock.
Yeah.
So much so that you wouldn't even notice that it's there. It's actually attached in such a way that it's basically like a part of the rock. And I showed my wife these things. The first thing she wanted to do was eat it.
Yeah, food is so important in the Chinese psyche. For instance, it's customary for people to ask each other, "Ni chilama," which means, "Have you eaten?"
Yeah.
Now, what's so special about that, you ask? Well, the interesting thing is, rather than just being a question that you might ask someone after mealtime, it's also used as a greeting, as in a common substitute to asking someone how they are. I like it. I like the caring nature of it. It's endearing.
Yeah, it's basically more or less a hello, like welcome, good morning. "Chud zao falama? Have you eaten breakfast?" That's what they say, but what they really mean is, "You all right? Are you okay?"
Yeah, and I've often wondered if it has deeper roots, a deeper meaning. Why the use of this phrase in particular?
Well, you have to remember that Chinese people didn't always have enough food to eat, and we've had regime changes, foreign invasions, natural disasters, droughts, famine. There's always been periods in history prior to the modern era, and including the modern era, where people lacked nourishment.
And there lies the reason behind one of the biggest misconceptions about Chinese people, that they are short in stature. Now, it's partially correct, but only when referring to the very elderly, really. You see, as recently as the late 1970s, 30% of China's population was undernourished. People lacked a balanced diet, and grains supplied the overwhelming majority of their calories. 1 in 3 children under the age of 5 had stunted growth.
Yeah. But if you look at the children now, especially the teenagers, some of them are giants. Basketball is more or less the national sport in China, and they have no shortage of players.
Yeah, and we spoke last week about the fitness drive across the country. People now are better able to look after themselves. They eat well and they try to stay in shape, at least for the most part. And a lot of this is down to the advances made to the economy. China has evolved to become this global power that has put their past trials and tribulations behind them. Famine is a bygone word.
Oh, most definitely. I eat more fruit here than I ever did in Ireland. But China today is so different. After the turn of the new millennium, fewer than 1 in 10 Chinese people were undernourished. The consumption of meat has nearly doubled, and the consumption of fruit has tripled in the past 3 decades. And like I say, I eat more fruit here than I would ever dream of eating in Ireland, because it's so cheap and it's everywhere.
Yeah, and there's a greater variety of it.
I didn't know what half of them were.
Yeah.
When I first came here, I was like, "Ooh, what's that? Ooh, what's that? Ooh, what's that?"
It's a dragon fruit.
Yeah, that's the most disappointing fruit in the world. That is
not too bad.
No, it doesn't taste too bad. It's bland though. It looks like it should taste like fire itself. It looks like it should have just such a sharp taste, but no, it's just grand. It's just all right. You'd rather eat a kiwi. I'd rather eat a kiwi. Anyway, so the weight of children at birth has risen, and the average 6-year-old child now is 2 inches taller, is 5 centimetres taller than in the 1970s. And remarkably, China feeds 20% of the world's population using less than 10% of the arable land. And there's plenty of food left over. There's always food left over to export.
That is remarkable.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy. Food has basically fueled the Chinese miracle. And if you go back 50 years to the 1970s, China had endured a famine in nearly every decade throughout the 19th and the early to mid 20th centuries, including the big one in 1907, which actually directly led to the downfall of the Qing dynasty. And there was one during the Taiping Rebellion that we mentioned a couple of weeks ago. Now, being Irish, we can definitely empathise with Chinese people on the topic of famines. I mean, our country, we had plenty of our own famines down through the years, and we know it's a delicate subject and people don't like talking about it much because there's a huge mental and emotional scars that it causes.
Yeah, and it's a taboo topic, and perhaps the deadliest of these famines in China, and I think the most recent one was the Great Famine, and this lasted between 1959 and 1961, so not all that long ago. Now, this famine killed people in the tens of millions. Estimations range from 15 to 55 million people. And it's one of those events in history where nobody can be sure of the exact number. And in this case, that number is so wide-ranging.
And you introduced me to a memoir on the topic of food of famine.
Yeah, I did. It's a short piece written by famed Chinese author Eoin Lia. Now, who is she? Eoin Lia is, without doubt, one of the finest authors alive today, as well as one of my favourites. She lives in the United States now, and she teaches at a university, I believe. And she released an exceptional collection of short stories some time ago called 1,000 Years of Good Prayers, which I recommend everyone who loves reading tries to get a hold of. But yeah, she wrote this piece entitled The Man Who Eats, which was published in the New Yorker in September 2004. And it's a haunting, yet quite touching story of hardship when food was scarce.
A tale of hunger, in other words.
Exactly, a tale of hunger. And you called it a memoir. I'm not sure if it is a memoir or just a short story written about some young girl in the third person. But nevertheless, it's an extremely stark account of really tough times when food was rationed and soy sauce and vinegar were considered treats.
Crazy, isn't it?
That's far out. But it's funny because in places it's charming, this story, such as when the author Eoin Lia, she describes going to the market. And this, for me, is what makes Eoin Lia such a fascinating writer. How she captures everyday life in China, the market scenes, the interaction between people. These descriptions come alive when I read them.
You can almost smell the bacon.
I can almost smell the bacon.
Now, that's effective writing. Use the senses. Appeal to the senses.
Absolutely. And with that, we're going to leave it there. That was quite the mouthful, wasn't it, Owen? Pardon the pun.
I'm feeling peckish now.
Remember, follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to us on YouTube, on Google Podcasts, or on iTunes. Wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts.
And write to us. Tell us how we are. Tell us who you are. Give us some feedback. The China Podcast at outlook.com.
Yeah, you can email us there.
Yeah, you can email us there. So, it's dinner time. What do you want?
Rice.
Noodles?
How about rice noodles?
Oh, yeah, go on. Let's go. Toodles.